The next session is actually on fluids. It's a very important topic. As physicians, we've been giving fluids to a lot of patients for the last several years, but still a lot of questions and controversies remain in what type of fluid to use, how much volume to use, and when to start, when to stop. So the next session we'll discuss these controversies. We have a very eminent speaker and teacher with us who will discuss this topic. It is Professor Ram Rajgopalan, who is a Director of Clinical Services Critical Care at SRMC Chennai. And the session will be moderated by Dr. Balasubramaniam, who is a Consultant Critical Care at Continental Hospitals. Over to you, Bala, for the proceedings.
Good evening, all. Respected Ram Rajgopalan, sir. At the outset, I'd like to thank the Critic 2021 organizing team for giving me this opportunity to discuss this topic on fluids in ICU, when, how, and what, with one of the greatest teachers in critical care who activates your magnets of curiosity, knowledge, and wisdom, none other than Professor Ram Rajgopalan, sir. The main objective of today's talk is not about the resuscitative fluids, but about the fluids from there on. IV infusion of saline water has been in place from 1830s cholera pandemic. In 1896, Hamburger recognized that erythrocytes did not lie in saline solution and concluded that blood of a man is isotonic with 0.9% sodium chloride, albeit the plasma is close to 0.6% sodium chloride. 191 years down the line, even now, in many of the scenarios, sodium chloride has been our preferential fluid for various reasons. Let us understand what are the main concerns regarding the fluid administration from Professor Ram Rajgopalan, sir.
Thank you. Thanks for that introduction, and I hope I can clarify my position without the use of PowerPoint slides, which I'm typically known to use. But I hope that we will be able to clarify some of these issues. We start with the primary discussion of why we need to talk about this issue in the first place, and then probably go on to the major debate that we have had, that is, what can we replace our normal saline with. We will probably discuss a little bit related to albumin, and then ultimately give you some teaching points as to what we need to finally achieve. Okay, let's just look at fluid. Whenever we talk about fluid, much of what has been said in ICU literature has been always focusing on resuscitative fluids. If you look at the large trials, it's the selection of crystalloid or colloid in the resuscitation of a patient. Obviously, during the initial phases of hemodynamic instability, this has got some significant relevance. And even if you look at those very big trials, the volume of resuscitative fluids in the first 4 to 5 days, in comparison to the total amount of fluids that are being delivered, is less than 10%. It's about 7.5% in some studies, and probably in the SAFE study, where they used a little bit more resuscitation. Okay, then they reached about 15%. But the majority of the fluid, 85% plus, is dominantly in the form of fluids that we give either for maintenance, for administration of medication, or for the provision of nutrition in the patients. And this we need to completely recognize. And this is very important, primarily because the nature of the fluids that we administer are probably also equally relevant. It is very typical that after the acute resuscitative phase, we would traditionally give close to about 100 ml of fluid per hour, the average adult, and that works out to be almost 2.5 liters. And if you're going to give 2.5 liters of normal saline, as you say that, okay, we are actually delivering an electrolyte load of sodium and chloride that is roughly 5 times what the sodium requirement of the body is. If you're going to look at it and say 70 milliequivalents for the average, 71 milliequivalent per kg is typically what you need, you probably are delivering close to 350 to even 400 milliequivalents of sodium in a given day. So this is one aspect of it. But equally, what we are recognizing right now is what accompanies that sodium in normal saline is a large amount of chloride. And we are giving chloride not only at the level that we're giving, overshooting our sodium levels, but we're also overshooting our chloride levels by a significantly greater factor. And this is something that we should recognize. And what we have realized in the recent past, at least not recent past, probably over the last several decades, but probably which we have kept under the covers, is when we give these sodium and chloride as the primary electrolytes, these are what are called strong ions. and they remain completely dissociated in the body. And there is a very important component. The greater the amount of negative ions that are going to be present, the sodium and the chloride are nearly equal to each other in contrast to what you would get under normal conditions, where the chloride is significantly less than the sodium. You're going to create a greater amount of electronegativity, which is going to result in a major dissociation of water, which is the single largest source of protons and is an acidifying process. So you're going to have, when you administer large amounts of chloride, the development of what we typically used to call hyperchloremic acidosis, but basically it is a change in your strong ion difference that is causing a huge amount of chloride load. The second aspect of chloride was something also that we recognized recently, and that is the administration of a large amount of chloride ultimately has negative effects on the kidney as well. By the fact that it stimulates the juxtaglomerular apparatus and ultimately causes a vasoconstriction, it can reduce your GFR quite significantly. And also it appears that while you have a chloride-induced diuresis, there is also a hypersensitivity of the kidney to vasopressors. So even the use of routine vasopressors can potentially hurt the kidney under these circumstances. So we're dealing with a condition that will not only be acidifying, but also has a tendency to hurt the vital organs at this point in time. And we are very worried that if we continue to use fluids in this fashion, that we potentially can be creating a major problem. And this is where we have come to the point where we say normal saline is not a benign fluid. It has too much of a chloride load, and as a consequence of that chloride load is going to probably be acidifying and potentially hurting the kidneys and resulting in poor outcomes in these patients. So in the recent past, so shall I take it to the next step? Effectively, with that as the background in our understanding, the next aspect of it is how have we dealt with this? So there has been a major approach in which solutions that contain less chloride, and usually the negative ions of chloride being replaced by classically in Ringer's lactate by lactate, or more recently by acetate and glutamate, whatever is being added to the newer solutions, the isolite, I guess it's called, okay, are kind of solutions that are suggested primarily because they will reduce the chloride load. They continue to remain mostly isotonic fluids. They are still sodium levels which are reasonably in the higher range than is expected. There are some which are also in the hypotonic kind of a situation that is available. But the basic idea behind this was the hope that when we switch our IV fluids and to these kinds of fluids, it probably is far more relevant. As I started in the initial discussion, the majority of fluids that we give are not resuscitative fluid, but basically are maintenance fluid. And we can account for almost a quarter of all the fluids, besides nutrition and medication, a quarter of all these fluids in the form of maintenance fluids. And if these maintenance fluids are changed to these balanced salt solutions, as we call them, which has less chloride and probably other substitutes, it may be much more logical in terms of making a difference in outcome. For this, we can talk the theory behind it. We can give a lot of explanations biochemically and at the receptor level. Okay, I remember. We had a conversation about how important it is for the glycocalyx. Okay, all this is rational. It's basically important for us to understand the mechanisms. But ultimately, what matters is there good enough clinical data to suggest that the use of these balanced salt solutions results in better outcomes. And for this, we have a large number of reasonably large randomized controls about the performance of those trials. But the most recent one, the BASICS trial, which came out of Brazil through the entire COVID time, they started in 2017 and finished it at the peak of their COVID work. Okay, is a absolutely fascinating trial. But let me just go through these few trials for what it is worth. The first trial was a pilot control trial, which is called the SPLIT trial, which was done in New Zealand, dominantly on surgical patients, very small trial, but probably gave us, and the endpoint that they were looking at was only in terms of the development of acute kidney injury. They were not looking in terms of mortality or anything. And they didn't see anything. But it was possible to use that data to derive the frequency with which you can get the injury, so that the other studies that have subsequently come can be powered appropriately. So there has been 2 follow-up studies. One is called the SALT-ED. I'm saying SALT-ED with the intention of identifying that it was done in the emergency department and not necessarily something that we can easily extrapolate to our ICUs. But even there, they were looking only in terms of 2 endpoints. One was the duration of hospital stay, and I think the second one was a combined endpoint, what they call the MAKE, or major acute kidney events, as they were calling. And this was something they added as an afterthought. And what they saw was, though it didn't affect your duration of stay, it probably only affected this kidney events. And it was defined as a combination of death, a worsening of your KDIGO score, and the need for dialysis. All of these are, with the exception of death, the other 2 are subjective endpoints. And this is an open label study, so potentially there's a huge amount of bias in this. It was followed by what was more relevant to us, the SMART study, which was only in ICU patients. This again was unfortunately an open label study. It was not a blinded study, but it was a single center, multiple ICU kind of a study, which recruited up to almost 15,000 patients. And there again, when you look at it, they looked at 90-day mortality, if I'm right. I may be wrong, but the mortality was not very different. The primary endpoint was not very different. But there again, they claim that the injury that you can get was probably marginally better. If I remember right, I don't know whether it was the mortality or the end injury, was such a small, it was a p0.04 kind of a value, very marginal, that if you had a small change in the size of the study, you effectively have a non-significant result. So effectively, these 3 trials were negative. Okay, and there were lots of people said, oh, maybe we need to do a good quality, completely blinded randomized controlled trial, and that is what the BASICS is. The BASICS is surprisingly good because they did a few things. They looked at the fluid not only in the initial resuscitator point, they also continued to use that fluid on a continuous basis through the entire ICU. And whenever they could, even the transport, for the use of medication, they tried to switch the fluid according to what they randomized. But unfortunately, the study also shows no difference. But there is one probably very interesting subset in this particular study that raises a concern, and that is patients with neurological injury. There was an excess mortality in patients with neurological injury, okay, which raises a concern that if it is not protective, it potentially is going to hurt people with neurological problems, and maybe something that we need to be very cautious about. So as you look at it, as long as the theory was reasonably strong, we thought maybe we can manipulate it by changing these fluids, but we have completely drawn a blank at this point in time. And I wouldn't say that this has not been adequately tested. It's been tested more than adequately, and in the circumstances that you and I will be dealing with, and we find it is not very beneficial. The question that we need to ask is, why is this happening? We know that these particular agents are definitely more beneficial than normal saline. We know the adverse effects of normal saline. Why is it that when we replace this fluid, that we are not getting the kind of outcomes? And the probable reason, again, and I think we need to look at this very carefully, is what we get from one very large retrospective analysis from Holland, where they say, if you really look at the fluid, the resuscitative fluids less than 10%, the maintenance fluids about 1/4 of all the fluids, but there is a third component that we probably underestimate. And that third component is usually where we give our medications and electrolytes and everything else that we additionally will provide for the patient, which can account for 1/3 of all the fluids that are being administered. And very typically, the transport fluid that we use, say, for medication is typically normal saline. Okay, so maybe we were under accounting for that difference. And what they did was a very interesting thing. They modeled their own study and then said, if we replace all our normal saline in our unit with a balanced salt solution, how much less chloride will we be giving? They found that they can reduce the chloride only by about 3% or so. On the other hand, if they said, if we used all the transport fluid and everything else, we gave it as hypertonic saline, normal saline or half normal saline rather, okay, or less than that, the chloride load dramatically comes down. It changes the concept completely. The chloride load that we've been talking about, traditionally, we believe if we twist the medication around that we'll be able to handle it. These guys are suggesting very strongly that maybe we should shift towards using more hypotonic fluids. This may be something that we need to test. This is only a suggestion, and this is something that carries its own adverse effects. In the ICU, we know that the use of hypotonic solutions carries its risk, particularly in terms of cerebral edema and neurological complications that you can get. So you need to be very cautious and probably need to think of this a little bit more. So we still have not come to a point where we can pick a solution and say, this is the one I'm going to use. Am I going to ask you all to jump and go ahead and use this Isolite or Plasmalite? I'm sorry, Plasmalite. I keep thinking of old solutions. No, I'm probably saying no. But I think we need to start thinking a little differently. So the third point I think, Bala, that you asked me about was in relation to albumin. Okay, the albumin as a maintenance solution, I want to be very clear. There is very little, again, if you really look at the studies, be careful. The famous study, the SAFE trial, was using albumin as a resuscitative fluid. Again, as I said, less than 15% of all the volume that was given was in the form of albumin, and their resuscitation criteria were very liberal. Almost as I would say, if you walked into the ICU, they would resuscitate you with albumin. That is the kind of criteria that they used. They were very liberal about their resuscitation criteria. Despite that, they gave only 15%. They didn't see any difference in outcome. They had a sufficient size. It was almost an 8,000 person trial, where they had looked for a very small difference between normal saline and albumin and couldn't detect that small difference, suggesting that it was nearly equivalent and not necessarily harmful for sure. There was no kidney injury, nothing at all. But that again is not an adequate study. For a maintenance fluid, the only data that we have probably for maintenance is the Alboios trial, which is an Italian multi-center trial that looked, again, it's an open label study, that looked at the use of albumin to raise your serum albumin values to greater than 3 or 3.5, I don't remember. They have a specific target, and they said if your albumin level was low, we give concentrated albumin solution. There were 20% albumin solution. Remember the SAFE study used a 4% albumin solution. Okay, and when they did this, they were able to raise the albumin levels dramatically, beautifully well into the range. But they did not have a difference in outcome. It was not associated with major adverse events either. There is a retrospective evaluation of that study which says that maybe in patients with septic shock, okay, there may be a benefit, but this is at best what we will say hypothesis generating, not necessarily something that has been consistently proven. If you look at the other subsets where we use it quite liberally, that is basically albumin in cirrhosis and in SBP and things like that, those are also based on very small trials, very small, a few hundred patients on randomized controlled trials, which seem to suggest that we should be using them. So if you really look very hard for data on albumin as a maintenance solution, number one, traditionally in most parts of the world, it is not available as a 4% solution like the Australians will have available. And we use concentrated solutions. We probably use it mainly to supplement albumin levels. And if you're going to use it in that direction, there is absolutely no benefit to it. I think, as I always love to talk about albumin, if you look at the comparison of the cost of albumin to the cost of an equivalent volume of resuscitative fluid with, say, normal saline, it is like the comparison of our old Maruti 800 to something like 11 Mercedes E-Class sedans. Well, probably this was in old values and probably is much more right now. But that is the cost differential that we need to also look at when we're going to give albumin. So if you really look at it, even that is not necessarily very dramatically different. Now, so how shall I summarize it and give you some endpoints? How are we doing with our times? Do we have a lot of time to discuss anything, or do you have any questions that you would like to add? You're okay?
Is there anything that we can monitor while administering any of these fluids?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, sure. If you're going to be using the balanced crystalloid, theoretically, the primary reason that you will be initiating that kind of therapy is when you're worried about the development of hyperchloremic acidosis, I suspect. Okay, so you're looking at your blood gases and looking at your electrolytes on a routine basis will allow you to identify when a patient develops an acidosis and there is no other explanation. And then when you look at an anion gap, you find that the anion gap is non-existent. So that very, very clearly will point you in that kind of a direction. And that probably will be one aspect that we need to monitor. There are concerns that if you overuse these solutions, you may produce a degree of an alkalosis. It is always worthwhile looking at your acid-base status as you resuscitate with this. Again, most of our solutions are again isotonic, if not necessarily hypotonic. And again, I don't think we really need to worry about sodium levels as a big concern. But I can't think of too many other things that I would specifically monitor unless you have something that you would like me to add. Okay, so that's fair enough. So let's just look to see what can we ultimately get as our lessons as far as this is concerned. Okay, let's start with a few issues and I will talk. Fluid administration in the ICU is very much a part of what we do as intensivists. It is divided into your resuscitative fluid, which I clearly identified as less than 10% of the entire volume during the stay of the patient in the ICU. The majority is going to be in terms of maintenance and replacement and other fluids. The maintenance fluids account for roughly 1/4 of everything. And here, when we try to manipulate these maintenance fluids, dominantly by the use of these new balanced salt solutions, it doesn't appear, even though we biochemically change these, all these studies will show you that the biochemical changes are absolutely terrific. Even though we biochemically change it into a favorable environment, we do not translate into a genuine benefit in terms of survival, length of stay, and the argument about the kidney injury, because that kidney injury parameter that most of them use, that MAKE, I want everybody to just remember that MAKE is almost the same as FAKE. Okay, so MAKE basically is a combined endpoint of both, definitive endpoints like death, and it also includes subjective endpoints like decision to dialyze, and as a consequence is very manipulatable in an open label study. We don't have any data. The only closed label double-blinded study, that is the Brazilian study, the BASICS, doesn't show us any difference in renal function issues. So broadly, when you look at it, the maintenance fluids are not very significant. The one thing that I think we are recognizing increasingly is there is a third component of fluids, what we call the creep, or the addition of fluids that are used for replacement, for electrolyte supplementation, for administration of medication, which we typically are told should be provided either as a dextrose-based solution or a normal saline-based solution. I think most of us are in favor of using a normal saline base. And that, considering it is about 1/3 of all the fluids that you're giving, is probably going to be the single largest load in terms of the sodium that you're going to be, the chloride that you're going to be administering. Can you modify that? Yes, one option, and this is what the Dutch guys say, basically switch all your fluids to a dextrose-based solution. Okay, unless there is incompatibility issues, very specifically, there's going to be a very minor number of medication that you can't give in a dextrose base. Okay, well, there can be the other side of it. Dextrose in that form can also create hyperglycemia, which we need to definitely watch in terms of the balance. Okay, so that may be the only solutions that we have. Or if you don't use dextrose-based solutions, consider using hypotonic solutions. As I said, this particular study, when they modeled their data, they seem to suggest that using hypotonic creep solutions are probably a much better way of reducing your chloride load than switching to a balanced salt solution. The role of albumin is very limited. Please remember, albumin, again, in the concentrated forms, has less electrolytes along with them. The not so concentrated, the 4% solution has a large amount of sodium chloride typically, and that can be something that can add to it. So, but there is probably no genuine great value in the use of albumin as a maintenance kind of solution in the ICU. Okay, so this seems to be about as much as I will know. And I hope that this will be a reasonable clarification of the overall idea. Okay.
Thank you, sir. And as always, you're crisp, clear, prudent, and articulative on your views. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks. Okay.